Humbug. You're live. Okay, you're live. You're going live. You might be live. You think you're live. My hair gets too distracting. I'll put on my hat. This was this will be a shorter video for sure than the ones that nobody's watched yet. But instead of just doing a rebuttal to other videos, now I'm also not necessarily rebutting my own, but referencing. I think it was episode 204. I don't know. I don't remember. I had a bit about screenwriting that I was going to include in this, and now I'm not. But I will talk about the meme for the thumbnail, the reading silently. I did have a rebuttal for that years ago on Facebook, which is, well, sometimes I wanted to be that reader. Sometimes I preferred to just scribble if the assigned reading was not terribly interesting. But it was also, it was always a welcome escape from having to listen to some illiterate child fumble through some really simple book when the teacher had cut me off to give somebody else in the circle a turn as early as kindergarten. No, we'll put that aside for now. I had another joke. Okay, I was talking about this in not just episode 204, but I think I touched on this in the one about writers groups. Which episode was that? Maybe I can find out real quick. It's been a while. 195, but there were others in between, obviously. So maybe I touched on some of this in 195 too, and I don't recall. But basically, it's when other people are reading your work and how they're going to react to it, that kind of thing. So again, we're in the early drafting stage here. Not typically when we've written a thing we believe is ready for publication, although some of us think we're ready for publication before other people have even given us this initial criticism. So that's a thing. But when you're signing up for classes, especially if you're going from high school to college, this is kind of what I wanted to address a little bit more than episode 195 or even, well, the stuff in 204 we'll get to in a minute, I think. That creative writing, I wanted to put quotes in the title, but they wouldn't fit, is basically a misnomer for a lot of these classes or these teachers. Even as, a self-described pantser. This term, I don't know that it originated with Stephen King, but I also talked about the Stephen King thing briefly in one of the things, and I wanted to go into detail about that too, briefly, very briefly. When I was relaying some of the Stephen King method, which I haven't read the whole book of that, to another younger writer, I wasn't trying to tell him he should do the Stephen King method or be I was just trying to tell him certain elements of the thing that I knew of that would probably help him. Okay. I don't have any one particular, I've said this previously, I don't have any one particular strategy that I think is a fit all for everyone. That's kind of the reason I make these videos anyway, is to kind of not say that those bullet point videos are bad or wrong, because most of the advice in them is, more or less correct, but to say that it's not, a 100% thing. And usually they qualify their own videos saying that anyway, but the nuance is why I'm here, right? Anyway, so when you get into a creative writing class, as someone like me, a pantser more than an outliner, and you're stuck in a class with a teacher who only believes in outlining everything, as has been more often than not my case. Like I said, I sort of mentioned this already, but I can't recall which video exactly. But so yes, things are a bit looser here in terms of my methodology and advice. Now, I had read, and this kind of jumps right into it, I had read a comment on one of those videos before I get into the actual next part, a guy who says he revises every time after he finishes writing a chunk before going on to the next chunk, presumably the next day or the next couple days or whatever his schedule might be, so that he already has draft one basically finished in the terms of being technically already draft two. I think that's an okay strategy. It's not the worst one I've heard. But I think when he's saying he's revising, he's really more likely cleaning up prose and grammar and that kind of thing than really changing the story effectively. Because how can you change your story all that much when you don't have all that much story to change yet? You know, if you've only written 3 chapters and you're a pantser and not an outliner, you know, he doesn't specify if he's a pantser or an outliner, but if he's a pantser, it's even worse. If he's an outliner, then yes, but then you're going from an outline, so you're not intent on changing your story anyway. So you will have a cleaner draft, but I wouldn't necessarily say you have a second draft. Does that jibe? So I think maybe he was bragging a little bit more, and you know, I looked on his site and I see that he's produced no video content like this about his superior strategy apart from one random comment. So I don't know how many of these revised chapters he's actually accomplished, or if they add up to anything significant on the whole, more than whatever I've, you know, typed. Yeah, we wish you luck. Like I said, again, I'm throwing it in there just as, you know, a useful nugget. Okay, somebody offered this nugget. If you want to try his method, then maybe you'll find it useful too. That's fine. Again, you will be, though, writing for yourself then, and not whatever the critique partners or your teacher or whoever have even read it yet. He might not have any of those things. He's writing for himself, I assume. Again, if you have a teacher, of course they want cleaner copy, but you may or may not be turning in only a chapter a week. We don't know how long his chapters are either. If it's a 40-page chapter, it's going to take you longer than a day to revise that before you get on to writing the next one. So again, that's why most of us say get that first draft done before you worry about the revision. Again, his idea of revision might just be missed quotation marks and choppy sentence structure and that kind of thing. Then there was the 3-element of the story triangle that I didn't talk about yet, which is somebody else's video. This is very poorly written for anyone to actually read. It's small and not perfect because I didn't necessarily plan on going into this deeply, but since I mentioned it in the last video, I'll mention it again in this video. Certain principles still must ring true no matter how much you organize and proceed with the first draft, whether you're revising or not. So in the triangle, the conflict is at the top, the stakes are in one corner, and the attention of the reader, you know, keeping them hooked or whatever, is the other one, and that's what we're going to be talking about in a minute in this video. So that's why I'm touching on it. And on the between the stakes and the conflict, you get the plot. Or if you, hopefully you have a plot. If you're in a classroom setting, especially, they're going to expect you to have a plot. That's why it's not really as creative writing as you'd like to expect, because you turn in something with no plot that's just random and your grade may suffer. Then between the conflict and the attention of the reader, you get the tension, which again, if you don't have conflict, you don't have much of a story, which we talked about, which is the most basic advice. Again, your teacher is going to be looking for this almost foremost, more than your character descriptions and how well you paint the scene and all that. And then in between the stakes, I did a whole video about stakes already, 203 or whatever it was. And attention of the reader is your sympathy, where if you don't have a sympathetic character, you might be in trouble. Even if you try to make the villain your main character, then you have to try and make the villain typically somewhat sympathetic for most readers to be on board, blah, 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 blah. And then the plot, it said something like some stories are more of a sequence of events, and that's where they fall flat because there's not the tension and the conflict and the this and the that. And so I had said, yes, outline versus creative is kind of a misnomer. Was I guess Stephen King's kind of take on it. You know, he kind of likes to write the story around the characters kind of more. Again, I haven't read his book. I'm not too far divorced from his methodology, though, from what I've gathered, but I'm not entirely 100% on board with everything he says. Or at least I don't seem to completely work that way. And so I don't expect everyone else to work that way. And yeah, I'm not really going into the pyramid as much from memory here. But I think that's the basic. You can probably look that up online if it's a thing that guy didn't just invent himself. Okay, but then in the just to be funny, I'm a Scrabble rouser, right? I think a Scrabble rouser, here's your Easter egg, is one of those people who just loves to throw in big words just to sound smart or whatever. Yeah, sorry, Mike. Just more comfortable with the hat on. I don't. Again, in one of those writing books, I think it was Stephen King, in fact, who said, but I could be misquoting, the word that you're grasping for or groping for is the wrong word. Just put in the word you know. Don't try to be a thesaurus. Maybe in the second draft, you can go back and thesaurus a little bit, but it might sound inauthentic or read poorly if it's yada, yada, yada. But the Stephen King advice is don't break the spell. When you're in the zone, stay in the zone. Put in a nonsense word and fix it later. Again, what that guy is saying about he fixes it sooner than later, fine, but he's still fixing it after. He's not breaking, we assume, if he's doing the Stephen King method, he's not breaking his stride to fumble and then try and get back to what you were thinking about before. I have a lot of that problem where, again, I can't write by hand very well because I can type faster than I can write, but I can still think faster than I can type. So sometimes you're typing that paragraph and you're really into it and you're really hoping you get it done before you lose that paragraph. And even with an outline, you'll have that problem because the outline isn't going to fill in those descriptors for you. The outline isn't going to, an outline is terse and little bites of ideas and words, single words. It's not these full thoughts. And so when you're finally galloping and then you have to stop and reshoe the horse, it can be an issue. It's no secret. Okay. So then the info dump issues. Now, what I had said in the previous video, this relates to the other gal's video who does bullet point videos to a larger extent. And so she had kind of contradicted herself, not heavily, but slightly enough that it caused me to call attention to what I had said previously, where I was saying that maybe a lot of men aren't buying fiction as much because we like the info dump. And I want to clarify that, yes, what she's saying is correct, that there are good and bad ways to do info dumps, okay? So just because I said it's okay to do an info dump doesn't mean I think it's great. But again, info dump in the first draft, not that big of a deal. You go back and you fix it and you make it more like what she's describing in her video of more seamless info dumps. And the other guy, the triangle guy, he had talked about this also, and I had watched his video and her video at different times and blah, blah, blah. Okay, so to go back to this, though, the info dump issues, at first, I think she said kind of like an info dump is okay. And then she said more than a paragraph is really a problem. Well, technically, according to her, almost any info dump is a problem. Identifying the info dump was kind of the point of the thing. So it's not necessarily the length that she had the issue with, but then she has the length of the issue, or issue with the length, sorry. But same as when you're writing and that stopping to shoe the horse, it's the same thing. It slows down the narrative. It interrupts the hook. There's no action going on as such. All these things she says are true. Those are her, her words, more or less. And that writers typically do a lot of these things more in the early chapters and the first scenes to try and get readers up to speed, and prologues and that kind of thing. And then she, explains exposition and backstory are critical elements. Yes. they immerse the reader in the character's circumstances and the environment, as we talked about in the triangle of attention of the reader and sympathy, right? Yes, but the info dump common in prologues and prefaces, especially sci-fi and fantasy, tend to be omniscient and not jibing with the point of view character. She shows us, she says they tend to read like history books, which is kind of true. And she shows a short example that's not really too problematic for me, though. Like I said, maybe guys look for slightly less emotional text-ish. I don't know. But again, if you're having a short prologue for a good reason, because bam, you're going to hit the ground running with your first chapter, then I have less of a problem with it. But most literary fiction doesn't come with prologues. Again, that's kind of a genre thing. So how well it fits in your genre versus what's expected, there's wiggle room, there's gray area. And again, you're doing your first draft, right? She, as I said in the previous video, different one, hang on. Which one was it? Sorry, I'm interrupting the flow right now, right? Was it 204 or it doesn't matter. Anyway, was it 201? I don't think it was 201. Well, now I've lost my own train of thought. Anyway, what I had said was in one of the previous ones, genres and all that. It doesn't matter. Okay, actually, it does kind of matter. Oh yeah, I remember now. These other author or video creator, content creators should do a better job putting their videos into playlists that break them up into what stage of the writing process you're engaged in. So that's what I was trying to grope for, looking for, that I didn't find. But it's in here in one of these videos. Was it foil character? It might have been 206. And it might have been 204. It doesn't matter. Anyway, I keep saying it doesn't matter, then I keep going back to it. But anyway, the point is, again, getting the first draft done should be a totally different animal than anything else. Just getting it to length, getting it to speed, getting it to where it's readable. Some of that might be draft 2, but most of that should be draft 1. Okay. So lengthy expository passages don't advance the plot. That's true. And background info. So she wants you to parse it out, and so we can learn things as we go instead of just cramming it all into the first chapter or two. And her trick is to look for passages that can stand alone, and those are the bad ones, or the ones that should be changed or broken up or put into a more of a point of view style of writing. Fine. Okay. And again, there was gray areas and caveats and blah, blah, blah. The next way that most people do the info dump, that they all have said this, so if you've watched their videos, you've already heard this, but is unnatural dialogue, which is most common when you're trying to avoid the previous type of info dump. So it's usually somewhat usable more than, when using a blatant over-the-top example like the one she gives. Again, where it's more like a character giving you a history lesson all of a sudden, and it's done strictly for the reader's benefit and not realistic in the story. Except, again, in real life, geeks actually do talk like this quite often, like the guy who I met at Hobby Lobby getting frames and going on and on about World War II aircraft and former presidents and generals and such and that kind of thing. I guess she would hate him as a character in a book, even though I talked to him for like 20 minutes in real life. That kind of thing. Yeah, maybe. I mean, the point of going to Hobby Lobby wasn't to meet that guy. It was, to buy frames for my mediocre art or whatever. But the highlight of the thing wasn't buying frames. The highlight of the thing was meeting this guy, right, that I had stuff in common with. So what makes a good story in real life, I guess, makes a terrible story for editors and creative writing teachers and that kind of thing, unless you write them in the way that they want to read them, I guess. Something like that. Is that our takeaway? 20 minutes. Well, this is already twice as long as I thought it would be, but we're almost done, I promise. Okay, so then the forced character reflections, which is not quite a history book thing, but and she says this is actually, kind of good because it goes to interiority, which was the last video, which is critical to success for your book. Interiority. I did a whole one on that. Yeah, 206. Yes, the previous one. And I'm kind of putting in the numbers for me, even though I'm not going to watch this later. Sure, whatever. Well, for easier reference for you people to understand that they don't necessarily go in an order, but they do kind of build on each other. So if you're watching this now because you got hooked in by the title, hopefully you'll go back and watch some of the other ones that nobody's watched, right? Okay. But, okay, so here we repeat ourselves. History book rather than genuine train of thought, same as dialogue issues. Again, still, that dialogue that doesn't sound like a real conversation. Reflections should relate to the scene, not just be thrown in for no reason. Now, again, sometimes people have random memories or a bit of a song that gets stuck in your head or something that has nothing to do with your current situation. There was an episode of Outlander where they did this entirely for a reason. But yeah, it should be for a reason. I mean, if you just have a character who goes off, on tangents or whatever, then that pattern needs to be established in what we discussed in the previous video talking about character motivations, which was 203. I don't remember. Interiority was 205 and 203. Yes, 203. I'm getting better at remember. I think it might have been some other stuff, but 203 for sure. Claims still given same info in all examples, which is not completely true. Okay. She took some passages that she wrote herself or whatever as an example and then changed them up and said, see, it still has all the same information. And I was sitting there going, no, it doesn't. I would have not wanted to hear that and that and that actually in a different way. So again, my taste in reading and her taste in writing or whatever might be slightly different. But I'm not going to just read her examples off here. You'll figure that out if you're actually writing, if you're breaking these rules or want to break these rules or whatever. So again, all solid advice, but more necessary in revision phase, to summarize here, than writing the first draft when trying to get the story onto the page. Teachers whom expect you to revise immediately upon critiques before you've even written chapter 2, etc. Those are the ones I disagree with or drive me crazy. But they are usually coming from a place where they have been published or the university or whatever trusts them and values their opinion more than yours. So again, your grade is kind of hinged on doing things their way, even if their way is not optimal or the best or whatever. I don't know what to tell you, except that when you're writing for publication, when you're writing on your own, you're not beholden to this teacher anymore. So approach them as two separate things. And I would often do this. I would often write a bit for the class that I was turning in for the class, and then have my own, off the books version or whatever that was the one that was the real one, And if you're taking a class like that, yeah, you can leave out the gratuitous stuff that you might put in a published novel because, again, decorum, maybe to a degree. I don't know. I know there's some people that want to, push every angle and violate all the rules or norms or whatever and be just shocking or whatever. But there was one woman who wrote a thing, but then she didn't make it up. She said it was a true story that actually happened to her. So it was kind of like, okay, you're writing this more to get it off your chest than to maybe to shock yourself more than shock us. We were kind of reading it going, yeah, and maybe the the personnel in the thing was more shocking than the actual action of the thing, right? In some degree, because then it was like, ooh, who, more than what. So there is that. But so yeah, I mean, Mr. Keating would say, there's a time for courage and a time for caution, and that time for caution might be what you turn in for a grade, and that's been addressed in many movies already and things anyway. So okay, well, like I said, I guess I can stop now as the usual. If you have any questions, please put them in the comments. If there's something I didn't quite explain very well, I kind of glossed over some stuff, but wasn't really the whole point of the video anyway. Excuse me. So anyway, yeah, happy to try and clear things up if that comes. But again, we're like I said, I'm not doing my videos focusing on any one thing. So we're talking about first drafts and we're talking about publication, but so there's a lot of space in between there where some of this advice might fit better than other. Whereas these other people, like I said, they're giving you very specific advice for very different times on that journey. And so if you're watching a video about how to query for publication and you haven't even outlined or pantsed your first draft yet, don't overthink it. Get to the writing first.